And today's webinar is a typical example where we have invited speakers from the EU Knowledge Hub on Radicalisation, which is a body within the European Union. And you will hear more about this very soon. But this is a way to support their, let's say, agenda and briefing the EuroPris member and the wider network on their activities and strategies. This webinar is organized with a Q&A function. So at the bottom of your screen, you can see a Q&A button. And I encourage you to ask questions there. We will keep most of the questions to the end, to the panel discussion. But if you have significant technical questions about a presentation, you can also ask them directly under the presentation, and then I will try to address that to just clarify after each presentation. But the most of the questions we will keep until the end to the panel discussion. The webinar will be recorded, edited, and published on the EuroPris website under the same event page as you used for the registration. And with those housekeeping details, I would like to start with the content part. And we are very happy to today have 3 distinguished speakers, which are all representing also the membership of EuroPris. And the first one out on the floor is Nadia Radkovska. She works for the General Directorate of Execution of Sentences in Bulgaria. She's also a prisoner probation and PCV expert, working with radicalization issues since a long time. Nadia is also a board member of ICPA, the global professional organization for prison practitioners. And she is also the former chair of the PCCP, which is a council within the Council of Europe focusing on penological cooperation. Secondly, today we will have Emmanuel Banutai. And Emmanuel is head of international cooperation in the Slovenian prison administration. He's also the coordinator of a project called Holistic Radicalisation Prevention Initiative, HOPE, and he will introduce you more to this in just a minute. Emmanuel is also a member of the EU Knowledge Hub, and he's also part of an intersectoral working group on radicalization in Slovenia. And last but not least, we will have Torben Adams from Germany, Bremen. He's head of the division of Ministry of Justice of Constitutional Affairs, and he is also a member of the EU Knowledge Hub and will tell you a bit more about the trends in Europe and other relevant information. So those are the 3 speakers for today, and I would like now to kick off with Nadia and the first presentation. She will tell us a little bit more about the EU Knowledge Hub and how it operates. It used to be called the Radicalisation Awareness Network, but now it changed names and has a new structure since a while back. And how this Knowledge Hub can help us better understand and share knowledge about radicalization in Europe, but also to promote international cooperation. So with those words, I would like to hand over to you, Nadia, and very welcome to today's event.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gustav. Thank you for this very kind invitation. I'm really very, very pleased to share this thought. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I'm also very pleased to see on the screen that we have more than 70 actually colleagues who are in front of the screen. So very warm welcome to all of them, and very sorry for this technical problem with my presentation. Yes, I think that we can see now. Can you see now? Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Before starting, talking more about the response of radical, what kind of response we provide when it comes to radicalization and violent extremism in prison and the EU Knowledge Hub. I would like just to talk a little bit about what is going on around. Because radicalization and violent extremism, and we have enough evidences already, is a very rapidly changing landscape. And we all know, colleagues, that radicalization within the European prisons and not only is still a very growing concern for everybody who is involved, including policymakers, security agencies, prison staff, and administration. We know that prisons often marked by overcrowding, really bad material condition, social isolation, and identity crisis among the inmates, which can provide a very good ground for extremist ideologies to be spread. Please have in mind that according to the latest space statistic, which is a statistic of the Council of Europe, more than 60% of the member states of the Council of Europe face overcrowding in their prisons. So we can imagine how this affects the spread of radicalization and vulnerabilities in prison, especially when it comes to very, very marginalized and socially excluded groups we have in prison. In addition, more and more people with mental health issues and disorders. So understanding the complex social, psychological, institutional factors that contribute to radicalization is essential for developing effective prevention strategies. We know that more and more European countries and prison administration have increasingly focused on multi-level approaches that combine intelligence gathering, staff training, psychological support, and rehabilitation program. And more the focus is on international cooperation and sharing of practices. Can I have the next slide, please? I would like just to mention about this changing landscape. Using the TSAT report, this is the European Union Terrorism Situation and Trend Report for 2025, which is a situational overview which presents aggregated figures and describes the major developments and trends in the terrorism landscape in the EU in 2024. So probably you can see these movements on the screen. In 2024, we have 58 people who have been convicted for attacks, but we have 449 people who have been arrested for terrorism-related offenses across 20 member states. Most of these arrests were for jihadist-related terrorism, more than 289. All of these cases, which are for now just numbers on the screen, but as practitioners and people who are related, somehow connected to prison, we know that all these cases are inside our institutions and need to be managed and to be provided with the necessary interventions. Can we go on the next slide? Thank you. Thank you. I cannot put my camera because if I put my camera, I will have problems. Sorry, but I will try. Okay, if we go a little bit beyond the borders of the European continent, because we cannot exclude the global picture of the the journey of the terrorism and radicalization trends. And if we go to the Global Terrorism Index, for example, we will see that there is a growth of terrorism attacks and incidents across the world. The number of countries experienced at least one terrorist incident increased from 58 to 66. It's the global picture. For example, the Sahel is the most affected region globally, accounting for over half of all deaths from terrorism in 2024, and 19% of attacks globally. 5 of the 10 countries most impacted by terrorism around the world are in the Sahel region. When it comes to Europe, and according to the EU TSAT report, there have been 58 terrorist attacks recorded. 34 were completed, 5 failed, and 19 were foiled. 24 terrorist attacks were attributed to jihadist terrorism, which actually shows a significant increase from 14 attacks reported in 2023. We have 5 people killed from jihadist terrorist attacks and 18 injured, 6 completed in France, 2 in Germany, and 1 in Ireland, 1 in the Netherlands. So this happened in the different parts of Europe, from the western part to the Scandinavian, and you will see that the left-wing and anarchist terrorism is more spread in Greece, for example. There were 21 attacks, 18 completed, and the majority in Italy and Greece, which is the south part of Europe. We also have ethno-nationalist and separatist attacks, from which 4 completed in France and 1 in Italy. And other form, this is something new, other form of terrorism, from which 5 completed in the Czech Republic, Denmark, Lithuania, Malta, and Slovenia. When it comes to this form of terrorism, these are mainly anti-government, anti-system, and anti-institutional groups. In most of the cases, majority of these groups are non-violent. Some accept or justify violence. This is something new on the field. Can I have the next slide, please? These are the trends we observe across Europe. More and more young people are involved in jihadist terrorism-related cases. Many minors are connected online, radicalized together, and plan attacks online. The majority of these young individuals were supporters to Islamic States, but seems to remain largely separated from the established jihadist movements and with very, very limited knowledge of jihadist ideology. We know about the developments when it comes to technologies. Technology, particularly artificial intelligence, is rapidly changing the dynamics of how terrorist organizations communicate and how they recruit people. There is no more need to go and to visit training camps. It's enough to have internet. One of the main, by the way, developments is the growing engagement, but this is something that I suppose Torben is going to talk of, right-wing violent extremists with online occultist and satanic communities known as 764 or COM network. Social media and messaging applications also remain the main vehicles to spread terrorism. And this is something that we evidence more and more. And of course, radicalization in prison and the release of former terrorist convicts also continue to be a very major concern for the Euro member states. And now I will give you 2 particular examples from 2024. Of course, they are they're just examples. We have much more, which shown us that we need really to revise our policies and also practices inside prison. In February 2024, the National Court of Spain convicted 2 men of recruitment and indoctrination and sentenced them to serve 7.5 years of imprisonment. The men already serving prison term for terrorist offenses tried to influence other inmates to spread their jihadist ideology, to remain united, and to influence other inmates to retain their jihadist ideology. They sent messages and letters with ISIS symbols and other jihadist content and sought the radicalization of fellow Muslims in the prison. And another case for a person who has served successfully, let's say, his prison sentence, who has been released on 17th of July 2024 in La Terte, which is in France. A radicalized former detainee released the previous month and claiming to be an ISIS soldier, attempted to assassinate a taxi driver. He initially intended to target members of the Jewish community around the synagogue, and the perpetrator has been arrested a couple of days later. So we have many similar cases of people who have been released from prison or who are still in prison and who are involved in the dissemination of radical ideas. May I have the next slide? Yes, this is also very interesting, and this is, I suppose, of interest for every prison administration. What is going on when it comes to the length of the penalties? In most of the EU member states, we don't have a kind of standard. For terrorist-related offenses, for example, in 2024, we have a range from 2 months to life imprisonment. So we evidence a very diverse penal policy when it comes to terrorist-related offenses. Prison term up to 5 years is the most common penalty across Europe, more than 69% of the cases, and penalties of 10 or more years of imprisonment were given in 60% of those who are convicted for terrorist or terrorist-related offenses. Of them, 320 are convicted for jihadist terrorism, which shown us that jihadist terrorism offenses are still a major threat across Europe. And probably it is interesting to be observed that 24 individuals were convicted of right-wing terrorism-related offenses in 2024. Can I go to the next slide? And now, what is the European response of this very, holistic picture and very complex picture we have in this very dynamic landscape? The European Commission prepares every 2 years, so-called the strategic orientation on a coordinational EU approach to prevent radicalization. The strategic orientations support the implementation of the EU counter-terrorism agenda to respond effectively and in a coordinated manner to the rapidly changing threat landscape in Europe when it comes to radicalization and terrorism. It should be noted that every 2 years, the priorities are different, but they are strongly interconnected. And actually, this is how the EU Knowledge Hub was created as a continuity of the Radicalisation Awareness Network. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So these are the activities under the umbrella of the EU Knowledge Hub. We have a lot of different dimensions incorporated into this project. We have different thematic panels which are composed by experts, practitioners, policymakers, researchers. We have so-called project-based collaboration, policy and practice joint event, different ad hoc workshops, and cross-cutting activities are also organized under the umbrella of the EU Knowledge Hub on a different burning topics. For example, just before a couple of days ago, there was a really interesting one on young radicalization in Brussels. The EU Knowledge Hub also organized different training to enhance the skills of practitioners coming from the different fields of this issue. Something new, which was not introduced during the existence of the Radicalisation Awareness Network, is the mentoring and job shadowing program. Of course, there is a research component and research board, which actually is entitled to provide data and to analyze the radicalization developments. And we have so-called foresight scenarios, which are connected to anticipating future, which are more focused on anticipating future developments. Can we go to the next slide? So maybe most of you are already aware about the different thematic panels organized by the EU Knowledge Hub. As you may see on the screen, we have a thematic panel responsible to explore the different ideologies and conspiracy narratives. The thematic panel 2 is focused on prisons, rehabilitation, and reintegration. There is a thematic panel on technologies and online dimension because, as I already mentioned, and according to the data we have, this is more and more growing issue. We have local dimension, polarisation and resilience building, lone actors and mental health issues, foreign terrorist fighters, volunteer and families, geopolitical factors and foreign influence, and also special advisors on evaluation, strategic communication, minors and victims of terrorism. So if we can try just to make the video happen, as yeah.
Yep, let me just reshare my screen for that.
Yes.
The EU Knowledge Hub on Prevention of Radicalisation runs 7 thematic panels that are made up of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. Their work embraces a whole-of-society approach to preventing radicalisation. Each panel tackles a key challenge in preventing radicalisation. Brought together under one mission, the panels are a core pillar of the EU Knowledge Hub's work, turning expert knowledge into concrete policy support for prevention efforts in EU member states. Earlier this year, the panels launched in Brussels with full-day meetings, interactive, engaging, and packed with ideas.
In our panel, our idea is to build a group which is engaging and which is active and trying to develop some concrete ideas for different silos like practitioners, like academics and policymakers.
I really want to make sure that the knowledge that we have here, that really spreads to frontline practitioners, that be therapists, schools, educators.
So we're really hoping to build on the lessons learned
to build on PCV interventions that were successful, because there are many of them. So it's really important in this panel to discuss this.
We have to tick out of the box, but to do that, we have to know the box.
Each panel, with around 30 experts led by 2 co-leaders, will explore its themes in depth, seeking to facilitate exchange across disciplines and connect research, policy making, and real-life practices.
We need to bring loads of different people and perspectives together in one room and have a discussion on eye level in order to identify problems, solutions.
We need experts from security, we need experts from treatment, we need experts also from health units. So radicalization is a huge problem, a global problem.
In our panel there are many very good experts, so I have a high trust on the expertise of the group, and the first goal is to find out some kind of common understanding on this topic, lone actors and mental health issues.
We have to identify what the big knowledge gaps are. So we have to be able to identify what our panel members think.
The overarching aim of this thematic panel is to create a common approach to foreign terrorist fighters, volunteers, and also their families, children and teenagers that are born in regions of conflict, are suffering from the situation and are dependent on our attention.
The radicalization landscape in Europe is becoming increasingly complex, evolving rapidly with new threats emerging at various levels, crossing borders, connecting ideologies, and moving online.
Hot topics at the moment is the radicalized minors.
We're seeing emerging challenges, and I think the online sphere really brings that additional challenge within that, and that really, motivates me to do this.
In the very long term is to secure online spaces and to make them a more positive experience that is resilient, democratic, and that is resistant to the online harms and the perpetuation of it.
While providing a platform for exchange and discussion, the work of the thematic panels goes beyond that. Each panel will deliver clear, actionable recommendations to support the EU and its member states in their domestic prevention efforts.
So if we want to solve this kind of really complicated challenges that we have, I think that we need the knowledge and expertise of all relevant stakeholders.
So thank you very much for making this miracle happen. I suppose that you saw many familiar faces on the screen, some of them presented today. But behind everything, behind this knowledge hub is the concept to bring together people with knowledge coming from the different fields of the social environment, and to try to find solutions taking into consideration the challenges we have nowadays related to radicalization, terrorism, violent extremism, and the growing numbers of people who are involved in violent offenses. So this is the main focus of the Euro Knowledge Hub. But when it comes to thematic panel 2 and prisons, the main idea behind is to address the challenges with radicalization in prison setting and after release, which includes also probation. Also, one of the main tasks of this panel is to promote the multi-agency approach. The multi-agency approach is crucial, and you will see after 1 or 2 slides more about this. Also, another very important element from the main goals of this thematic panel, and to put the accent, to put the focus on the rehabilitation and reintegration component when it comes to the prison environment. Also, the panel has the task to review the existing frameworks and propose new methodologies applicable across the EU member states, including some other countries. Okay, I don't have time. Can we go to the next slide? So we already conducted two meetings. Please have in mind that in these 2 meetings and during our meetings, more than 30 professionals are involved, and they represent more than 28 EU member states. So we are trying to, you know, to have all the European perspectives, and to find the standards which could be applicable in the different prison service as a response to the challenges we have related to radicalization and violent extremism. So the first meeting was focused on how to ensure the prison exit continuum, how to tackle the cross-sectoral challenges, and how to find the successful solutions. So the journey of the people who are released from prison to continue in a more sustainable way. We have recognized some very common institutional challenges. For example, how to detect the early signs of radicalization, how to address the growing numbers of people with mental health issues in prison, and the nexus with radicalization and radical and more extremist behavior, how to deal with the lack of cultural sensitivity, how to deal with the rigid communication channels we have, and too many legal limitations, which sometimes are the reason why we cannot confront with some of the implications related to people who are sentenced for terrorism or radicalized offenses. Of course, we have developed a lot, we have achieved a lot. For example, and you probably know how many comprehensive risk assessment tools we already have, how many tailored interventions are already developed across Europe. We put a lot of efforts to train and to prepare the staff to confront with this challenging during that daily routine work. We also try to involve as much as possible stakeholders to support our efforts inside prison after release. And we also try to develop more and more practices in the probation context when it comes to dealing with people who are radicalized or who are somehow connected with radicalization and violent extremism. Can I have the next slide, please? This is the voice of your colleagues from across Europe. What they have recognized as the challenges, and what kind of solutions they can provide. One of the main challenges which was identified by the experts was the lack of information sharing and the legal framework. The relationship between staff and inmates. We are talking more and more about the introduction of dynamic security and how dynamic security to support staff when dealing with inmates, but how this dynamic security could be and is it possible to be adapted in the cases of people who are sentenced for terrorism and radicalization, having in mind their security regime and possibilities to attend different interventions. How to identify also the needs behind the different ideologies. If you remember from the first slide, we have such a diverse profile of radicalization. Of course, your colleagues decided to provide some good solutions, and I would like to believe that some of these solutions could serve also in your case to support your work. For example, to raise the awareness at the political level and to encourage more and more strategic thinking when it comes to radicalization and violent extremism in prison. Also very important because staff are the most important. It's very important to increase staff motivation and engagement in the different interventions. It is also very important when we have such case in prison, as I said, to involve more and more stakeholders, to be involved in their reintegration process. But this rehabilitation and reintegration process should start at the early beginning of the execution of the sentence. And we also, as a solution, they have recognized more tailor-made approaches, accounting for the needs instead of overemphasizing the risk components. So to put more the attention of the needs and the vulnerabilities of the inmates instead of the risk components. May I have the next slide, please? And the next slide, because I have only 1 minute. Okay, this was our second meeting, which was focused on how to early identify now and what, how to strengthen the interagency information sharing procedures to be able to recognize on early stages signs of vulnerabilities. And these are the key pillars which the members of our thematic panel have recognized when it comes to this topic. First, the prison staff, the frontline staff, they are the crucial agents in early detection. Prison staff, we all know, play a key role in identifying early signs and symbols of radicalization, and their daily contact with inmates position them to observe behavioral changes. But of course, they require structured training and support to act effectively. Very important is also to take into consideration the mental health of staff dealing with this profile of inmates, and how to support their daily routine tasks. Now, second, it's how to balance the security and rehabilitation, especially when it comes to high-risk setting, and the needs for more nuanced case-specific approaches. It is very important, and those of you who work on the ground know that it's very important to combine strict security measures with the psychological support and multi-agency cooperation, and to make, to find the balance between the security regime and the opportunities and access of people who are radicalized to different rehabilitation and reintegration activities. Evaluation as a strategic tool for learning, adaptation, and improvement. Evaluation of PCVE is not just a compliance exercise. So it's not just about compliance, but it's a very critical mechanism for improving our practices, to know that we are on the right track. Evaluation should serve as a very critical friend, a very reflective process that helps practitioners and policymakers to refine their work, to understand what is really happened and what truly matters, and adapt to the complex realities on the ground. So evaluation has been identified as a very, very crucial process when it comes to the different interventions and tools we use in prison. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, these are the key takeaways from the work of thematic panel 2 after having two meetings. And probably this is not something new for you, but this has been confirmed by so many practitioners and policymakers, which is a very, very good sign that we are on the same boat. So training for practitioners really should be modernized in order to equip frontline professionals with the necessary skills to identify and be able to observe the early signs, symbols, and behavioral changes, potentially leading to radicalization. What was really stressed many times is the need for more standardized institutional protocols and information sharing mechanisms, and the need they to be developed. Otherwise, we face more and more the issues related to the organizational culture of sharing of information, which in many cases it's time from the whole process, time which is very crucial in such cases. We need legal and regulatory framework to be modernized in order to reflect the operational, not only the legal, but the operational realities, and to ensure the legal provisions that will support timely and effective preventive actions. Thank you very much, Gustav. Just for your information, our next meeting, which will take place at the end of November, we'll actually address the topic related to vulnerabilities to radicalization from the macro and the micro level, and the exploration of secondary and tertiary prevention. So this is something upcoming. We expect a lot of insights and takeaways from this meeting, because more and more vulnerabilities remain a big concern inside prison, having in mind the diverse profiles we have. So for those of you who are now in front of the screens, I just would like to mention that you are more than welcome to join some of our activities. As probably you saw, they are connected to many different sectors and different fields. So if you can find your zone of interest, and you are more of welcome to join the cross-cutting events, as well as some of the internships we are organizing very often. Please follow the webpage of the European Commission and the EU Knowledge Hub, as well as the EuroPris webpage, because very often we work in cooperation with you, and this is really great. Very often you publish on your website some information. And last but not at least, please don't hesitate to contact me if you need any assistance to find your place in this project. I will be more than pleased to support you. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm a woman. I have always problems with the time. But thank you very much for your kind attention, and hopefully the next time we will be able to see each other in person. So thank you. And Gustav, I'm sorry. I deserve punishment.
I poked you a bit.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for this very comprehensive, not only explaining the function of the Knowledge Hub, but also sharing some of the insights from the first meetings. Very interesting. And we might get back to those in the Q&A later. I just want to again encourage you to sign up for the EuroPris newsletter, but also for the newsletter of the EU Knowledge Hub, which is very informative. There you get all the updates on events, activities, and also outputs both from EuroPris and the EU Knowledge Hub. So if my team could share the links to sign up for these newsletters, I think that would be helpful for our participants. Thank you. So moving on, I would now like to introduce Mr. Banutaj, Emanuel Banutaj from Slovenia, to kind of build on Nadia's presentation and explain a bit more about international cooperation, but also the project he's part of. So the floor is yours, Emanuel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. While I'm trying to manage IT, is it visible? Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So first of all, thank you, Gustav, for the kind introduction, and thank you to EuroPris for invitation to this amazing webinar. It is absolutely a pleasure to participate together with such an important topic together with distinguished colleagues Nadia and Torben. And as I can see, currently above 80 participants attendees already, so it actually confirms the importance and the up-to-date knowledge on the radicalization. I'll try to connect what Nadia has said, not to duplicate and also to manage the time, so I'll just hit the road. I just hope that it will start properly. Now, before going into the presentation of the whole project that we believe, the partners believe, actually introduced most of the things that have been said, how to enhance and build on the capacity in prison and other systems. Would like to give you a key context and some of the, let's say, systematic overview, and then switch the whole project itself. So, as Nadia also mentioned, we can see actually two things. The topic of radicalization, violent extremism, still remains an evolving and complex challenge throughout the whole correctional system and even beyond. And also, as it was mentioned in the TSAT report for the last year, we can see a shifting of ideological focus. Although, as I have noticed, also some of the questions have been placed by the participants. While the right-wing terrorism was previously a major concern, we can see also, of course, a right-wing arrests increased, but at the same time, the jihadist terrorism reasserted itself, but mostly through, let's say, other IT-based platforms. So what it means is actually putting into the place, together with the thematic developments and the major geopolitical conflicts, notably the war in Ukraine and in the Gaza and the West Bank, it actually continues a strongly amplified radicalization and mobilization of these ideas across the whole ideological spectrum. And we believe that because this webinar actually explores both the current threats and also the practical steps towards this capacity-based response, that hope was one of the examples how things could be addressed. Now, as I mentioned, just a few brief overviews of the systematic perception on how to strengthen the prison capacities and international cooperation. It was mentioned a few times by Nadia that it still remains a priority area under the EU security policy and also the Council of Europe standards. In most of the strategic documents, it is said that the training is among the core pillars, also within the European priority, how to address this. Now, the key frameworks have been mentioned. I'm listing here a few, not necessarily the only ones here, but keeping in mind the European Judicial Training Strategy, the guidelines on the radicalization, and the EU counterterrorism agenda. Now, when it comes to the core systematic challenges, three topics or the three bullet points have been mentioned. Institutional capacities and human resources. What I mean by that is we, in many cases, see the correctional systems are facing uneven levels of staff expertise and managing this radicalization or at-risk individuals. At the same time, the training remains fragmented, often is very much limited, and ad hoc initiatives are emerging. When it comes to international and interagency cooperation as another important topic, I have in mind particularly cooperation between the prison and probation, the police or the law enforcement, intelligence, social services, etc., etc. It was mentioned in several EU strategic documents, but it also has to be implemented or encountered in the Western Balkan area and also the MENA area as well. And last but not least, the operational methodologies and the gaps here. We're going to talk about that also later on. I believe that Torben has prepared quite an extensive input, but the risk assessment models are significantly different, and among the countries, tools are often not standardized and not adopted. And I'm not talking about the Vera2R models, but in general. Another aspect here is the dynamic security principle, which is not still fully integrated into the staff culture, which actually runs the daily routine in the institutions. And of course, as mentioned even by Nadia, the rehabilitation programs that often lack the depth of this motivational interviewing and some other important aspects of the rehabilitation process. A few more topics on the key priorities areas and the capacity development. So mentioning here the professional training and mentoring, it was mentioned also in the previous presentation. It will also be mentioned briefly in the whole project. Development of standardized tools mentioned as well, and some other elements as well. Not to withhold too long for this, also the regional and international cooperation frameworks have to be kept in mind. I deliberately put out two dimensions. So the European dimension, not only the EU, but wider with the neighboring countries, and as well the global dimension has to be put into the perspective. Now, talking a little bit more about the whole project. It was funded by the Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway through the EEA Norway grants. We believe that this initiative represents a strategic shift from a reactive counter-radicalization towards a proactive and more holistic prevention, focusing on three very specific topics. So we developed materials for the prison, probation, and the civil society environments simultaneously, with some specificities, but nevertheless, as you will see later on. Also, international cooperation was and peer learning was also incorporated because there were 8 different countries involved into the project, 4 of those as the end beneficiaries and 4 of the remaining ones as the expert level inputs. Core objectives: to create a European community of practice connecting justice, probation, academics, etc. Now, about the hope and what we hope that these outputs represent to the community. It was focusing on the Western Balkan, Central Europe, Western Balkan area, but nevertheless, the cooperation was Europe-wide. Partnership ranging from Portugal, Spain, Scandinavia, of course, Italy, and the central eastern part of the Europe. And you can see the participants. Also, the partnering organization from Slovenia was at that time the Slovenian Probation Administration. Project objectives. So we wanted to create a European learning hub on radicalization, which was focusing more or less to the Balkan, Southern and Eastern European countries as the end beneficiaries, but incorporated the know-how and expertise and experiences from all around Europe or wider. So we were trying to develop a network of training and research organizations, academies, prison and probation systems that could intervene and use these materials for their practice. It represented an important and improved the transition from prison to probation and to the community. So the overarching vicious cycle that we face when we enter this system. And at the end, trying to promote the holistic radicalization prevention initiative as such. Now, among the outputs or the key products of this project, I'm going to name just the 3, and everything you see here, the presentations will be shared, but also you can, you're welcome to also check available materials online, because the HOPE results are available on the HOPE Radar website. So everything I'm presenting here is also available there. So we prepared actually together with partners from Italy and Spain 3 important documents. State-of-the-art analysis, basically encompassing more or less everything that has been developed by that time. The next one was the state-of-the-art analysis, the European survey. So we had more than 300 responses, analyzed semi-structured interviews from the region and wider. And last but not least, a very important document, the needs assessment report, especially focusing on the in-depth knowledge about the needs from the project stakeholders. This was basically the important start of the project. Now, one of the things that has been developed next to the materials was also a whole radicalization network launched in 2022, currently encompassing almost 60 organizations from 24 different countries. And as you can see on the map, it actually is evolving from the initial project-related partners to a bigger and bigger community that we hope for, from various perspectives of professions. This is an example of how it looks like on the webpage, so the hoperedproject.eu. And if you want to take a closer look to it, just click try to register, and then you get a secretariat feedback. And once you're in, you can download a lot of important materials in various languages, particularly from this region. Just a few words about the training program itself. We developed a materials on a level of 5 different modules, starting from module 1 on the comprehensive overview of all the radicalization phenomena aspects, continuing with the radicalization in criminal justice and community settings, so the prison, probation, and CSO, as I mentioned. Then following on, moving to the Balkan region, before we had prepared a module 4 on the radicalization risk assessment and information gathering within the criminal justice. Now, the module number 5 was an important add-on value because it actually represented an in-person component. Everything else is available online, but the 5th one was very important that actually presented a training in Bulgaria and Serbia on the rehabilitation and the reintegration processes of the violent extremism, terrorist offenders, interventions for disengagement, de-radicalization, some exit programs, some examples from Norway, etc. And also the component of the restorative justice practices and the PCVE and mentoring schemes were also presented. Not losing too much time on the beautiful looks of the module itself. As you can see, when the trainees enter this course, they get the full material, the course manual on the subtopics, and then they can go through it, learn it, and actually finish the online training sessions as such. But as I mentioned before, the module number 5 then actually represents the impersonal part of the training. Now, did the trainees' knowledge improve? And the thoughts about the course, it was shared. Some of the colleagues that I see are also here today. I believe it has, but there is, of course, still some place for improvement. And an important point that I want to address here before continuing with a short video is that it's up to each and every jurisdiction how to decide to implement the outputs of the project into their own training capacities and plans each year. Now, the training was also improved, or let's say included also aspects of the motivation interviewing inspired change talks and some other updated or very recent approaches, also influenced by the Norwegian mentoring scheme, which was very interesting to see for all the participants. They prepared a lot of video materials with some of the real stuff situations in their correctional system as such. Now, Brody, if I may ask to share a short, I think about 3 minutes long video, if I have that much time left before I conclude. I have to stop sharing probably before that, huh? Okay, thank you for your patience. Now I'll try to share my screen for the last 2 slides, if that's okay. Can you guys see my presentation again?
Not yet.
Okay, one moment. There you go. Should be the one. Everything okay?
Yeah.
This technology. Okay, for the concluding part, what I try to do here, and this is the slide before the last one, I promise, to visualize what we have learned throughout the whole 2.5 initially, but at the end 3-year project, almost 3.5-year project because of the COVID stroke in at the early beginning of the project, which is again an interesting experience, but nevertheless, how to build a resilient prison system to prevent radicalization and violent extremism. It actually focuses on 6 different, let's say, strategic pillars, among others also, of course, obviously training and professionalism. So developing a structured training programs for prison and probation staff with the CSO component included, of course. So embedding the motivation, interviewing, identity restoration, and narrative-based methods, which is also linked, of course, to, as mentioned before, the European Judicial Training Strategy document. The next one is the mentoring and peer learning. So to create the European mentoring network or networks and train-the-trainer system, because you cannot train all of them at the same time. But this actually could help to promote the continuous professional development throughout the whole region of the Europe. So EuroPris, EPTA, the Western Balkans, and so on and so forth. And of course, to encourage exchange the best practices among the EU and the neighboring countries. And this is, I think, the platform of EuroPris is, as mentioned even before, and throughout the EU Knowledge Hub activities, is also a very promising possibility. Now, moving on, the interagency cooperation that has been mentioned a few times today already. So how to strengthen the links between the prison probation, the law enforcement, intelligence, and other sectors that have a key role in the holistic approach of the prevention. How to establish formal channels and also informal, but mainly the formal channels, and to the knowledge how to properly exchange data. The EU Knowledge Hub, Council of Europe, standards, PCCP, UNODC, all of these, let's say, international key players can help member states or the countries how to make an important step forward. And last but not least, how to support the cross-border rehabilitation for foreign fighters, terrorist fighters. Moving on, the risk assessment intelligence models, I mentioned a few times today, how to harmonize the use of all these validated tools, the Vera2R, the ERG22, TRAP, etc., how to develop a multi-dimensional evidence-based risk assessment models that could be applicable to different, let's say, countries. Some have more money, some have less, but it's important that they are tailor-made to their own national needs, while at the same time to be applicable in the international cooperation spectrum. Also importantly, more and more organizations, and I'm not talking about the law enforcement only, but more and more organizations are using and incorporating OSINT, so the open source intelligence possibilities into their systems. Some other behavioral indicators for early detection, and more emerging is the AI possibility that can be incorporated into the, let's say, these models. Dynamic security, institutional culture has been mentioned, embedding the proactive security, of course, throughout the whole daily staff engagement and the communication. Train the staff as agents of change, not merely as controllers or the police, prison police officers. And of course, without the safety and the trust among them and the rehabilitation processes, it's hard to reduce the ideological entrenchment that these people possess. Last but not least, rehabilitation, reintegration aspect. So design individualized reintegration plans, pathways that address all these aspects, and to apply the multi-agency case management, if possible, to post-release supervision. And with that, the last slide is actually the continuance of the one that I presented at the early beginning, because before I started the presentation of the whole project, I just listed here a few strategic ways to make a step forward. Institutionalizing the training through European standards and certification mechanisms, expanding this mentoring and the peer learning via important networks as the EuroPris and so on, harmonize risk assessment tools, and to promote cross-validation across the whole jurisdictions. This validation has been mentioned today a few times. Strengthening the interagency data sharing, integrating prevention and rehabilitation with a broader rule of law on human and security frameworks, but of course also to ensure the sustainability through stable funding, both on the national level, but also on the because of the political ownership particularly, but also through via various international activities and funds, either through EuroPris, EA grants, DG Home, Council of Europe cooperation programs, and so on and so forth. Concluding remarks, it's all about moving beyond these isolated projects. They can be an absolutely amazing experience, but moving beyond them towards a systematic capacity building within the systems, and also to sustain international cooperation, which is the key, I believe, factor here. Last but not least, the transition from this threat analysis to a institutional resilience to prevent future radicalization and violent extremism as such. I wanted to continue even with the TESAT report, key implications for the prison and probation, but I believe that Nadia has mentioned them all. So with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your participation and indulging me with this, and looking forward to any questions in the Q&A session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I think this was very complementary to the first presentation on the EU Knowledge Hub, also seeing initiatives that are kind of strengthening each other. We can get back to the question on the overlap and the synergies here. Before we proceed with Torben Adams' presentation, I just want to let the participants know that we currently just have one question in the Q&A. So since we now have plenty of food for thought already, please take this opportunity to ask these three distinguished experts whatever you need to know in the field of prison radicalization while Torben is giving his speech, and then we can continue with the Q&A in the last half an hour or so. So take that opportunity. You find the function at the bottom of your screen. And with those words, I would like to hand over to Torben for the last presentation of today.
Thank you very much, dear Gustav. Could you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we see the EuroPris presentation with your nice logo from Bremen.
Well, this would be a test to read it out for you. Die Senatorin für Justiz und Verfassung, but I will not bother you with such little details. It's a great pleasure being invited from EuroPris, so thank you very much. And I am also very grateful for the great contributions from Nadia and Emmanuel. The gathering today is particularly important because radicalization in prison is still important. As a practitioner and now policymaker, I remember that after the collapse of the Islamic State, some member states said, well, we do not have no problems no more because the Islamic State failed and we can afford to pay less attention to this important topic. But this is wrong, as we have heard from Emmanuel and Nadia. And they also brought some content for us in our collective mission today, as we should share knowledge, tools, and best practices. I will not provide any silver bullet when I talk about best practices later, and I don't have any fancy videos, I'm afraid, but I prepared some content for you. I will talk about some trends in Europe. I will talk about radicalization threats within European societies and also in prison, because this is, of course, connected. I have prepared 3 examples, and I try to identify mechanisms on how we could prevent and respond to the risk of radicalization in prison. Having this said, I would really like to pinpoint that some of my content could be is considered very sensitive. and could be also confrontational. This is not the intention from me as an author. I would like to arouse actually some thoughts, to give some inspiration, and I will touch upon topics which, again, could be seen offensive, but this is not the intention. I hope we enter into a dialogue later when we have the question and answer panel, and this is also to encourage you to include as many questions, to use the opportunity to talk to Nadia, Emmanuel, and me. Yeah, my source is also the European Union Terrorism Situation and Trend Report. It should be known to all of you because I had a look into the guest list actually. They're all practitioners and policymakers, people who have really a saying in Europe. You are the ones who can really shape also the European prison landscape. And this trend and situation report is, of course, known to you. The second source, actually, for my presentation is my experience in Germany, but also in some other countries. The context, terrorism in the European Union, some key statistics is always provided from Nadia. You see actually that in 2024, 58 terrorist attacks were completed, failed or foiled in 40 member states. 34 were completed, which is actually a striking figure. And this is also divided by ideology. You will see that still 53% of the terrorist attacks were planned by a jihadist movement. And for the European Union Trend and Situation Report, jihadism is defined as a violent subset of Salafism, a revivalist Sunni Muslim movement that rejects democracy and elected parliaments, arguing that human legislation is at the odds of God's status as the sole lawgiver. Jihadists aim to create an Islamic State governed exclusively by Islamic State Sharia law, as they misinterpret it. Unlike other Salafist currents, jihadists legitimize the use of violence by referring to the classical Islamic doctrine on jihad and how they misinterpret it. All those who oppose jihadist interpretations of Islamic law are considered as enemies of the Islam and therefore considered a legitimate target. Some jihadists include Shia, Sufis, and other Muslims in the spectrum are therefore perceived as a potential enemy. So 53% of the planned foil attacks were actually planned from the jihadist movement, while still 47% of all terrorist attacks on European Union soil were planned from other radical movements like left-wing, right-wing, ethno-nationalists, and others. I will touch upon them as well later. And these figures, of course, have an impact on our work in prison, because if our police and our domestic or even not domestic intelligence service is doing a good work, these individuals will end up in prison, and this will result in arrests. And accordingly to the report, we had 449 individuals across 20 European Union member states incarcerated because of terrorist-related offenses. A higher portion, 64%, belongs actually to jihadism, as 289 were linked to jihadism. This is a higher proportion as the number I have introduced before, because of the wide networks of jihadism. 47 were actually linked to right-wing extremism, and you can see also all the other figures here on this slide. So there were convictions, and we have to deal with people who already were indoctrinated by radical violent beliefs. They could perhaps also spread such ideas in our prisons and infect others. But the first finding is, wow, we have nearly 500 individuals we have to deal with because they were already convinced from a life model which is other than your or my life model. Now, I will touch upon the first example. I told you I have prepared 3 examples. The first one is an emerging threat from northeast Syria. I have to ask you to follow me in a little journey in time. Now we are in 2014, and in 2014, the Islamic State was really at the peak. the coalition of the Combined Joint Task Force started an operation which was called Inherent Resolve. This was a multinational military formation established by the US-led international coalition against the Islamic State, with the stated aim to degrade and destroy the organization. This was in 2014. You remember 2014. The European Union Radicalisation Awareness Network was active, up and alive. All the European Union member states were very hard working to find solutions on how to prevent radicalization in prison, and this topic was extremely hot. Policymakers, lawmakers were really under pressure to find solutions, and many people from Europe and other countries traveled actually to join the Islamic State in Syria, but also in Iraq, of course. 42,000 people traveled. You remember that, perhaps, this figure, from 120 different countries. The majority was actually from Iraq and Syria, and many from Middle East and North Africa. But nevertheless, 5,000 traveled from Europe and 4,700 traveled from the former Soviet Union. And then in 2014, as mentioned, the Combined Joint Task Force operation started. And by the end of 2017, they reported that airstrikes had killed over 80,000 ISIL fighters. The coalition provided some billions to military equipment to the Iraqi armed forces and to others, and significant support was given to the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF. And then we come to this picture, because we learned many traveled. Unfortunately, many people died on both sides. 80,000 ISIL fighters died in this war, but still there's a tremendous number left. Here you see an aerial picture from a camp located in northeast Syria. This is the notorious Al-Hol camp, which was established also in 2014. It was a place for internally displaced person, IDPs, and in 2019, they had actually an occupation of 53,800. It's really a village controlled by the SDF. The Bashar's regime and the Ba'ath Party, they lost this part of Syria. ISIL lost this part of Syria, and the SDF was then later in charge to control this camp. There were huge support from the international community actually to repatriate also people in this camp back to countries of origin. And now there are still 40,000 people in this camp. Another figure, in 2024, the Bashar al-Assad's regime collapsed in early December 24, and the formation of a government led by the leader of Al-Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the HTS, marked a significant shift with potential greater regional geopolitical implications in the medium and long term. And now, dear colleagues, now we are here. This camp is controlled by the HTS. Some member states already expedited a kind of diplomatic process, considering the HTS as legitimate, sovereign political party running Syria, while others did not. There's a vacuum, and in my professional experience, I consider everything what happened on northeast Syrian soil in this moment as a threat for our societies. I was there in this camp more than 12 times, and there are many minors asking now why the countries of origin did not spend efforts to repatriate them. The Islamic State is extremely active in this camp, indoctrinating people, and this will also have an impact on our societies. And all of us working in prison will have one day someone who was born in this camp or who raised up in this camp. This is not to stigmatize the people in this camp. Of course, there are many, many people who want to return, who try to abandon the ideas of radical violent extremism, but I can assure you there are still many who could be a threat for our societies, and we have to find answers to them. Well, what a rosy side of this wonderful part of the world. I think the world community should not spare efforts to support them. The next slide, emerging right-wing models. Have you ever heard from active clubs? I would love to be with you now in one venue to discuss eye to eye this new emerging, what I call, threat. They recruit through fitness, combat sports, and brotherhood narratives. And to be fair, this somehow speaks even to me. I like sports. I was a former soldier. I do some fitness, believe it or not. And the narratives, they really speak to me. They are somehow very attractive. But of course, if you read the subtitles, they embedding white supremacist theologically and ideologies. So because their public face is neutral or even positive, they are harder to detect by conventional intelligence or prison tools. In a prison context, this means we must not only monitor ideology, but also guard programs, perhaps even of physical training and group fitness, which we actually welcome. We welcome actually sport activities as a tool to engage our people at risk to become violent extremists. So it's a very small grade. And I do believe that these active clubs matter for us in the prison context because there's a potential cross-influence with prisoners who are exposed or already engaged in martial arts, fitness culture, or even had some linkages to combat sports. This is a task we have to have on our radar. This means actually that we have to also monitor our prison-based rehabilitation programs in physical fitness. There are also some pictures from female activists on the screen. You see that, and the question is sometimes what draws women to these movements? There are several factors are recurring when we visit actually scholarly research. Women in far-right extremist movements, for instance, frequently take on now strategic roles as recruiters. They do propaganda, and they are organizers and fundraisers, very, very successful. Even in my country, they shape and spread ideology rather than just supporting from the sidelines. This is very sensitive when we discuss this topic because we touched on also progressive gender norms and feminism. Motivations for women joining radical movements include a search of belonging. This is not new to us. This is actually also the case as a pull factor for others. But it could be also a reaction of or against progressive gender norms of feminism and the appeal of alternative identity. These alternative identities, narratives, sometimes seem to solve their problems. And this is something what we have to have on our radar as well in our prison context. And of course, radical movements use smart and often tailored messages, appealing women's sense of purpose, invoking moral clarity, community, and also leadership opportunities, and exploiting digital channels, social media, and they know how to engage them. This is actually what I have identified also as another threat. You see in the picture, Active Club Denmark, Norway. In the corner right, there are different coat of arms from active clubs in Germany. They look very, very promising, tempting, and they provide the solution. And if a prison fails to provide the solution on how to return to society, they are there. They can close the gap, and we have to be better. Well, the next slide is extremely sensitive. And it's titled Risk of Infiltration and Co-optation, the Naivety of the West, or simple old or new anti-Semitism. Both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State propaganda tried to fit into the crisis in Gaza in 2024 into their narratives. ISIS, of course, consider Hamas as apostate, so ISIS did not work together with Hamas. IS even believes that Hamas have left the right path to Islam. Both have tried actually to manipulate people. in Europe and in other parts of the world. In early February this year, for instance, an IS spokesman released an audio message in which he called for attacks worldwide in response to the conflict in Gaza in a campaign titled "Kill Them Wherever You Will Find Them," which was referred to its claims for attacks by all IS branches throughout the year. This resulted into arrests also in our countries, right? Al-Qaeda tried to fit the conflict in Gaza into its anti-Western terrorist narrative and position itself as the global defender of Islam rather than focusing on the ongoing conflict. So they did not try to use cells and what they call cell satellites in Europe, but rather to spread the message that occupied territories should be left from the West. The liberation of Palestine remains still, of course, a main pillar of the Al-Qaeda. And what we have to consider, and this is the sensitive part, is that they tried to use in the aftermath of the 7 October attack to mobilize Western societies to march under the banner of solidarity with Gaza. Many were motivated by genuine and deeply human concerns for civilian suffering and the call to stop what they perceived, of course, as a humanitarian catastrophe. I did that as well. But whatever, however, this mass mobilization also served, intentionally or not, as a form of indirect legitimation for Hamas actions. I have to read out something what I found in one public accessible intelligence report. This manipulation of public sentiment was not accidental. External actors and adversarial powers have recognized and exploited this polarization for their own strategic aims. Russian state-linked media and propaganda outlets, for instance, have openly described the Free Palestine movement as a gift for dividing the West, an opportunity to undermine transatlantic cohesion and weaken democratic unity. And here we have also some linkages of terrorist activities and people who demonstrate to end the genocide in Gaza with the best intention, but are perhaps vulnerable and on risk to be convinced from ideas which not represent their first intention to support people who suffer on Palestine's soil. Unfortunately, but difficult. And to see that on Berlin streets, they burn the flag of Israel, and this would cause a different reaction before 7 October and what happened in Gaza. Nowadays, I would not say there's more solidarity, but more people are trying to justify these sentiments against Israel at large. Was a difficult part in this presentation. I hope I did not step on the toes of anyone, but we have to address it, in my opinion. Now, how prison services can identify, prevent, and respond to these risks. And much was already mentioned from Nadia and from Emmanuel. Some key references are the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Handbook on the management of violent extremist prisoners. We have the Council of Europe Guideline for Prison Probation Services. We have the publications from the Radicalisation Awareness Network. And I'm also very eager to have hands-on on the new publication from the EU Knowledge Hub. And of course, we have also ICCT handbook with this prison radicalization prevention chapter. And if you read into these standard books or key references, you will hear, of course, that you need risk and need assessment tools, that you have to find ways and instruments on behavioral change. And of course, you need to consider the environmental signals and the context. Quite often, poor prison conditions and grievances lead into radicalization. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The overall goal here is to lower the potential for radicalization by shaping the environment in which people live and work, and we all know that. if you ensure humane prison conditions, people at jeopardy are less likely to engage in violent extremism. Placement, classification policies are important. You need meaningful programming, and this is not new to you. I told you I don't have a silver bullet, but we have to critically ask, do we have the right educational and vocational measures, and do we have these critical thinking tools ourselves on board in order to develop tailored disengagement programs? If not, we will only have them in a kind of prison warhouse for a certain period of time, and we leave them unchanged. And it was mentioned already from Nadia that the average term for people accused for terrorist crimes of 5 years. We have to ask ourselves, what can we do with this 5 years? And we have, I told that earlier, 500 people accused for terrorist crimes in prison, but we have ways more to come, and we have ways more to protect. In my country, we have nearly 60,000 people incarcerated, and most of them are, of course, vulnerable. In one way or the other, they struggled in our society. In one way or the other, they were in conflict with the law and end up in prison. So they have to think about the future. What will come next after my release? And if we don't provide a better solution as radical movement, they will join them. If we do not have this empathy to support them towards release, these other movements, they will have instruments, and they have even finances, and they have good narratives. They can start over again there, and we have to convince them that this would be the wrong path. So, as mentioned earlier, intervention should be individualized. Ideological engagement could work out, not in all cases. You need credible scholars or facilitators to challenge extremist beliefs and promote alternative narratives. If you only have a good intention, this could also fail. They should be experienced. Intervention should be also continuously monitored and adjusted as people make progress. Sometimes this comes short. If someone is labeled a terrorist and incarcerated and subject of programs, he is still in the last quarter of his incarceration labeled as terrorist. Sometimes it's important also that we reflect them, that they made progress. And what I have mentioned earlier, in a nutshell, case management must bridge the gap to release, ensuring that support and supervision also continues after prison. It's a pity that the European Commission decided to divide the prison and probation working group in the new EU Knowledge Hub. I have no clue why they did that, but it's extremely important also that this gap is closed and that prison services work very, very closely with the probation services as they take over the clients one day. So this is the summary. I will not conduct a PowerPoint karaoke here, but the goal remains very clear: to engage, support, and redirect individuals showing signs of radicalization. The intervention should be tailored and evidence-informed, and not a one-size solution is in sight. When we look into the efforts from European Union member states and training of how they train correctional officers, we see such a gap. In my country, it takes 2.5 years to become a certified correctional officer, and then you're allowed to work in prison. In some other EU member states, they train staff in 8 weeks, and they are fully fledged correctional officers. And sometimes we forget that the social capital in our prisons are our uniformed correctional officers. They are on duty 24/7, while other highly specialized specialists are only there quite often from 9 to 5, or not even on the weekend, and never on night shift. And if we take it serious that we want to identify, prevent, and respond to risk of radicalization, we have to invest in our staff. And that includes, in my humble opinion, definitely also the uniformed staff. Before I move to the last part, I want to acknowledge that this topic is also, unfortunately, extremely complex and for many deeply emotional. And I hope I will not step on any foot. I would like to highlight a study which was conducted from the Counter-Extremism Project. In my presentation, which will be shared from the organizers, you'll see also the link. It's a relatively fresh study which was published in February. This study examined the role of anti-Semitism in the mobilization to violence by extremist and terrorist actors across 5 countries: in France, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and the United States. Across all 5 countries, they report that anti-Semitic incidents increased significantly, particularly following the events of October 7. The analysis highlighting recurring narratives, conspiracy theorists about alleged Jewish control, Holocaust denial or distortion, and anti-Zionist rhetoric that at times overlaps with traditional anti-Semitic patterns. Digital platforms play a central role. Social media, messaging services, and video sharing sites are widely used to spread propaganda, recruit followers, and incite hostility toward Jewish individuals or institutions. Transnational connections are also evident. This is for us important. Extremist networks from different ideological backgrounds, right-wing, left-wing, and Islamist, increasingly cooperate online and doing international demonstrations. Looking briefly at country examples, in Germany, anti-Semitism spans right-wing, left-wing, and Islamist movement, with a documented rise in both planned and executive attacks. So this is then actually the connection to the prison. France recorded one of the highest levels of physical anti-Semitic incidents in Europe, much of it linked to Islamist mobilization. In Hungary and Poland, anti-Semitism is often associated with nationalist and anti-globalist narratives or with historical revisionism. This is the hardest word ever. You will find it in my notes. The next slide, please. So this is the last one. And this, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, is very close to my heart. I found actually from someone who's very, very active in the PCVE world, a post on social media: the world is changing, there's no place for violent extremists. And I would fully sign this statement. Discussions around extremism, political movement, or terrorism designations can easily touch on broader societal or moral questions. But what matters in our professional context is what we remain guided by facts or legality and a commitment to human dignity or not. The White House fact sheets described Antifa recently as a militarist anarchist enterprise seeking to undermine lawful authority. And in September this year, a couple of days ago, an executive order formally designated was signed, and now the Antifas labeled a domestic terrorist organization. Of course, we have to respect US law by all means. In US law, domestic terrorism is defined as act dangerous to human life, intended to intimidate or coerce populations or influence government policy. By all means, again, they have the full autonomy to decide so. But as professionals engaged in preventing and countering violent extremism, our task is not to take sides, but to understand such developments also sometimes critical, to uphold democratic values, and to prevent violence in all its forms. The world is changing, I agree on that, and there's indeed no place for violent extremism, but we should also stick to our moral values. This is what I believe. And now, first terrorism charges brought against alleged Antifa members in Texas because they have attacked the ICE, of course. This is illegal, of course, but maybe we have in the future also people in prison alleged for terrorist crimes because of changes in the legislative landscape. and we have to deal with other people considered violent extremists. Something we should really think of. This was relatively difficult for me. I need a glass of water, but I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm very eager to get your questions together with my dear colleague, Nadia and Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Torben, for this exhaustive and in many ways exhaustive presentation. It raises a lot of questions, of course, and we won't be able to cover all of them today, but it's really a good way to address emerging questions and to highlight those for also future debates and meetings. So now to the Q&A, and I will like to start with some of the questions relating to more statistics. So in both, all three of you actually presented statistics from the recent years on different kinds of terrorist offending and also convictions. But we also know that since the civil war in Syria, etc., there are a number of prisoners already in prison that's been there for a long time. And there's a question in the Q&A about release numbers. If on EU level, if there's any estimates on how many prisoners that will be released in the, let's say, coming years that are now serving terrorist offense convictions. So that's the question. Feel free to respond, whoever of you in the panel that might have a good answer to this.
Well, if I may start, there are not many validated long-term figures available. You have mentioned many were released recently. It depends, and there's much friction across Europe. The domestic law sometimes provides that you have a supervision carried out by the police or the domestic intelligence or by the probation service, and then you are close to the beat. These reports and findings could be used actually to have an estimate on how many people reoffended and if they were subject of recidivism. But many are also released without these provisions, and accordingly to the very, very narrow options in our general data protection guidelines, we are not able as a prison service to have this information. So sometimes we did not know if our interventions, tailored interventions, were successful. We only know the negative success stories when people are rearrested, and I don't have these figures at hand, no. But there are also legal obstacles for us to...
If I sorry for interrupting, Torben, but if I put it a question like this, then you're all three involved in the EU Knowledge Hub, and you also have worked with the Radicalisation Awareness Network before. So is there any initiative on EU level to map out the, let's say, this kind of population? Has there been any initiatives like that, or is it just a black box? We don't know on EU level how many releases we will see in the coming years.
The answer is not satisfying, but even if you look into the space report, mentioned from Nadia, you will see that even some countries did not provide regular figures on, let's say, how many individuals are in pre-trial detention. So, as to my knowledge, it would take much time and effort to have such aggregated data, but perhaps Nadia or Emmanuel know more.
Gustav, by the way, reading the question at the same beginning, I have really tried to find some data, some statistics, but it seems that there is no something officially published. But what I have succeeded to find is that at the end of 2024, About 450 radicalized inmates have been released, 50 of them jihadists. This is what I have, but taking into consideration that more than 500 have been convicted in 2024, and taking into account, as I said, that the diversity when it comes to the length of the sentence is really huge in Europe. But taking into consideration that 69% of them are sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment, so we can, calculate somehow how many of them will be released after, and having in mind that we have previous people who have been sentenced, I think many, but there is another point. Not all the people, all the inmates who are radicalized are sentenced for terrorism-related offenses. This is another part of the issue which should be taken into consideration as well. So I don't think that we have objected.
That actually, Nadia, brings us to another question in the Q&A from the participants: how to quantify or assess the size of the challenge, also when it comes to persons not convicted for terrorism offenses, but that may be at risk or even be radicalized already in prison. So do you can you mention some tools or ways to identify this population in a prison system, from the project maybe, Emmanuel, or from other previous efforts made in this field?
I can maybe start, and then maybe if Torben or Nadia would like to add to that. Just a brief add-on to what was said earlier. I was just trying to go through my documents on the reliable data on the release of the terrorism-related offenders, and the only thing I got from my documentation was that I was doing some of the projects in the Western Balkans and Bosnia in particular. They have very country-specific and not as official data on foreseen releases, but most of them were connected to the forest terrorist fighters that came back from Syria. And the second part that was actually established is that they have a fairly low, in the sense of the length, low sentences. And as Torben also mentioned, a lot of them were released early and with a probation-related oversight to the community. And so far, at least I haven't got back any serious feedback on what this population is doing. When it comes to this second question, obviously there are some risk assessment tools available on the market. It was discussed also through the whole project and many other occasions, and I think that Torben can talk about this even further into details. Most of them are very specific, scientific, and tough to handle risk assessment tools. I'm talking in particular about the Vera 2R. You have to be a profile of an expert, psychologist, trained to perform assessment with these tools. And of course, these tools can detect early signs of radicalization, be it the person coming to the prison setting with already radicalization aspects or being radicalized while inside. So I believe there are tools available on the market. I'm not so sure how they are implemented in various countries. I can talk merely about my country, which is in the early phases of these let's say developments, but nevertheless, also the whole project was touching upon some of the aspects in module number 4, how to actually harmonize tools to provide feasible and hands-on useful tools, at least for the early detection signs, which is very important, especially nowadays when you talk about, and it was discussed a few times today already, going through the implications of the TESAT report and this cross-ideological contamination. And we had before right-wing extremism, we had jihadi or the religion perspective, radicalization. Now these philosophies are missing sometimes, and it's also one of the important things that we have to keep in mind is also this AI influence that and the let's say tech literacy that is available, especially for the younger people. Also, the TESAT report is mentioning that the youth in Europe is getting more and more connected to this topic, and that's why this we have to emphasize these early detection mechanisms and how to integrate them. They are more digitally not innovative, but fluent than we are. All of the narratives are now slowly, not so much slowly anymore, moving into the online environment. So we have to be aware to also incorporate these aspects into our training capacities within the prison system, how to empower, let's say, our prison staff to be available to detect at least signs and to avoid the positive, the false positive signs, which is also an important topic that we can talk about.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Sorry to say, but these have to be the closing words from today's panel, which actually was a good summary in a way that we have to keep track on this field and ever-developing field. I think all three panelists described developments that kind of raise awareness, but also raise some worries about continued threats and also inside prisons. So I think the conversation must continue, and EuroPris we will do our best to kind of support that conversation. And we now provided in the chat several resources for you to keep following, also the Knowledge Hub and the Hope Project, and as I said, to be continued. Please again follow us on LinkedIn and sign up for the newsletter to stay updated. The webinar will be recorded, as we said, so we will publish it when edited on our website. And last but not least, I want to thank again our dear panelists, Nadia, Torben, and Emmanuel, for your preparations and intricate, very mind-provoking presentations.